I'm no tech genius, but I knew if I wanted my business to crush it, I needed a website now. Thankfully, Bluehost made it easy. I customized, optimized, and monetized everything exactly how I wanted with AI. In minutes, my site was up. I couldn't believe it. The search engine tools even helped me get more site visitors. Whatever your passion project is, you can set it up with Bluehost. With their 30-day money-back guarantee, what have you got to lose? Head to Bluehost.com to start now.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is a podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
And my name is Daniel Kaka. And welcome back to part 2 of Superman Lives. Let's not waste any time. Let's just get into it.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather, now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21+. Terms and conditions apply.
And I guess let's talk about John Peters. Why is he still a producer? John Peters was overlooking that entire thing, and he seemed to be getting more and more unhinged. There were reports of him yelling at the team. There was one story where he brought in a Nat Geo magazine that had a holographic skull on the cover, and he yelled at the team saying, like, "This is it. This is what I want." And like slammed the magazine down and demanded this. And he made these ridiculous observations and like we're criticizing a bunch of the works there. I think in one of the interviews from the documentary with the artist, Tim Burton would actually have something in mind and would tell the artist to be like, "Hey, I need you to work on this type of alien. Can you put that together? I think this would be great for the film." And then John Peters would come in and look at him and be like, "Don't work on that anymore. We're not doing that." And he's like, "But I was by the director. He's the one that told me. Like, who am I supposed to listen to?"
Yeah.
He would also bring in groups of women and children to look at the art, kind of like a focus group. Mm-hmm. There was even an instance where I believe he was learning like Krav Maga, like John Peters was learning some sort of martial arts. And he actually tried to show off to one of the mothers, like his new skill, and actually put Rick Henricks, like the head of the production design, he put him in a headlock just to show off his new skills.
When you say he just brought in women and children to look at it, there's a part of me that wonders if that was an actual focus group testing thing in the way that movies would usually do it, or was he just going to the mall and saying, "Hey, you want to see some cool Superman things and tell me what you think?"
I want to imagine just because he is a Warner Brothers executive, he probably put it out to a bunch of other producers and said like, "Hey, if you have any kids," and have them come to the studio and look at some really cool things. I think that's how it may have came down. And just became like this exclusive thing.
But I like to imagine he's just finding random people on the street.
That would be really funny. Just pulling people off of the WB tour and just be like, hey, look at this. His idea was that by having children look at it, children oftentimes don't have a filter when it comes to criticizing things. And if children like it, then that means it'll sell as a toy.
Yep.
So that's his understanding there.
All about the toys. That's why we got a bajillion different Iron Man suits in Iron Man 3. Gotta sell those toys.
Yes. I mean, I understand what he's doing, but I can see how this is like really disruptive for these production designers to be like, I don't even know what this is. And now I'm getting put into a headlock. And John Peters is getting out of control. Even Tim Burton was getting fed up with him. There was a meeting where Peters ended up kissing Tim Burton on the lips.
Okay.
I don't know what the context is. Maybe he was trying to give him the mob kiss of death or something. I don't know. I don't understand.
Sounds like it was a really healthy work environment.
Yeah, it's great. So Strick's script, it kept on getting pushed back because of Peter's ridiculous demands and constant in-the-moment changes. So while the art department was coming up with anything based on the few details they were given, so they were trying to come up with as much stuff as possible, but they came up with sketches for Superman himself, the S logo, Brainiac's ship, Kryptons, Kryptonians, the Fortress of Solitude, Metropolis, Brainiac, which kind of looked like he was like a Merlin hat with a fishbowl on top of it. It's a weird concept. Keep in mind that they also had no direction as to where they were going. So they had multiple versions of all of these things, hoping that Peters would finally be happy with something so that they can move on instead of being in this development hell the whole time. Because keep in mind, they were in there for months. It wasn't like, oh, this is just a week-long project. Let's see what you can do. They were just months and months and months, and they're probably wondering, like, what is happening? I don't know. Yeah. So meanwhile, Burton was scouting for locations for Metropolis, and he eventually settled on Pittsburgh, which for him seemed very fitting because he's the Man of Steel, taking place in the Steel City, which has been used in Christopher Nolan's Batman movies a few times. So the setting had to be important, and contrasted much of what Tim Burton had done previously with Batman, who fought mostly in the night. Now we actually have a hero that's fighting during the daytime. Along with that, having to deal with Peter's demands, they had to find ways to keep the budget low. And every draft that was submitted, they were estimating that the cost of the production would go anywhere from like $140 to $190 million. I think the target cost for this, they were trying to get it down to like $100 million. So I know we talked a lot about the design, or at least the designers, but we do have to talk about his costume.
I don't know about this costume thing, Clark.
It'll work. It has to.
The famous Superman suit. There's a famous Polaroid of Nicolas Cage in a Superman costume. There's so many pictures of it, and those, yes, are real. That costume, or at least the costume design, was led by Colleen Atwood, who had previously worked on Edward Scissorhands, Mars Attacks, and Ed Wood. So she's worked a lot with Tim Burton. She has also gone on nowadays, I believe she worked on the Fantastic Beasts series too. So she's doing some Harry Potter stuff now. But yeah, she's a fantastic costume designer. The picture that you see of Nicolas Cage in that like bright blue suit, that was one of many different suits that were tested out. And then on top of that, there were hundreds of different types of materials and colors that were being tested out, because since they're shooting in the day, they have to make sure that it looks good in daylight, they have to make sure it looks good in action, and they have to make sure it looks good on film. And that's a whole lot of stuff to try and balance there.
Yeah.
Another problem was the red underwear on the outside.
What was wrong with the original costume was that he wore his underpants on the outside.
I know. We don't want to.
But maybe if they were darker blue, maybe if they weren't glaring red.
Something that has been, made fun of a lot, but there were talks of getting rid of it. There was another ridiculous suggestion that instead of underwear, they should be more like basketball shorts instead.
Okay.
Instead of underwear, which they quickly scrapped that idea. But yeah. Also, it came down to the question of the cape. And what is the practical purpose of the cape?
What does the cape mean exactly?
I know. Well, that's another, that's something that, I was going to treat it again the same way. Like, it's just,
because usually a cape on a hero in comics is a great way of showing that character in action. And on film, the reason for using it on film is because it hides the zipper in the back. So that's why a lot of superheroes have capes. But much like Batman, who can use his cape to glide through the air, why does Superman need it?
Yeah.
John Peters made the suggestion that he could kind of use it kind of like a lasso or even a weapon.
What?
I can see why Peters is throwing that out there. So, like, I kind of think of it like the cape that Doctor Strange has.
Okay, yeah.
Where he got to throw it out there and it kind of like does his bidding and looks out for him. So I can understand maybe he has a cape like that, but for the most part, like in the canon of Superman, it just doesn't.
Or maybe just let him have a cape because capes are cool.
Yeah. You know, if you just don't address it, which even in the Donner films, the cape is just accepted. There's no explanation for it. You don't need an explanation for it. We know what Superman looks like.
In the modern day Superman, he just has a cape and it's fine.
Yeah. We know him to have a cape. And if he did not have a cape, it would be more unusual.
And I think it would be more unusual for him to be fighting with the cape.
Yeah, it would. He put it out there, but they didn't really address it after that. And they just kind of ignored John Peters for the most part. And then on top of that, had to come down to Nicolas Cage's hair.
I like it. I'm starting to get attached to this length. What do you think?
We know Superman, for the most part, has always had short hair. This is Nicolas Cage around the time that he did Con Air. I mean, he had a perfect look for Superman because in Con Air, he's very built. But he had his long hair and they had to decide, well, is he going to keep his long hair or not? Because in the 90s comics, though, he did have long hair, especially when he died and he was resurrected in the Fortress of Solitude. He stayed there for a very, very long time.
I think that's the most noticeable thing about that publicity picture of Nicolas Cage in the Superman outfit that you can find that's like, you know, is tied to this project so much is the long hair sticks out like a sore thumb.
They were kind of back and forth on it, and I can't confirm, but I also can't deny that they were going to use his long hair or not, because they were debating it because Superman at the time in the 90s, in the comic books, he did have long hair in that. So they were considering it for that. But this is still pre-production and he's in between projects. So for him to have long hair doesn't seem unusual.
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
But the suit that was probably the most important was his regeneration suit. And this is actually really interesting. After Superman is killed by Doomsday, Kal-El's robot assistant Kay, he envelops himself around Superman to help regenerate and bring him back to life. And eventually becomes his new suit.
Oh, interesting.
So instead of a black suit like we saw in the comics, instead we got more of like this cyborg, ectoskeletal, like Pink Floyd laser light show kind of suit.
Weird.
I love the sparkle thing. Maybe he's like it has the imagination of the child.
It was so cool. It's so interesting if you see any behind the scenes. There's so much behind the scenes footage of that suit being put together, and it was amazing. The special effects artist that was in charge of this team, that was Steve Johnson. He worked previously on An American Werewolf in London, Ghostbusters, Big Trouble in Chinatown, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Species, we mentioned that before, Return of the Living Dead 3, and so much more. Basically, when it comes to like prosthetics and weird costumes, he was the guy to go to. The costume team went through so many prototypes trying to get this right. They tried different types of silicone and rubber suits that were difficult to put on and remove. The movement in them were very limited once you got them on, and any movement was met with what they called buckling, which I'd never heard this term before, but buckling is whenever a suit wrinkles and you can visibly see that wrinkle or like bulges out almost, that's what buckling is. So they were trying to avoid that. The design that worked best, though, that came from Bill Bryan, who had worked on Dune, Army of Darkness, Species, and Ghostbusters. In fact, Bill had met Steve Johnson while they both worked on Ghostbusters. And he took this method that he learned from Ghostbusters, and he actually started making these vacuum forming plastic pieces that would then weave together kind of like scales, so the movement would look a lot smoother and avoid that buckling and rubber look. They were overlapping each other, and whenever Superman would move, they would just kind of like shift closer together, kind of like little plates, or like scales is the best way to describe it. And then underneath the suit were these fiber optic cables that were all sequenced to light up to look like electricity was running through Superman's bodysuit. On the other hand, though, we have Brainiac, and trying to figure out what he was going to look like. So in the script, it said that Brainiac and Lex Luthor, they would fuse together into one entity, like I mentioned before, very much like Quirrell and Voldemort in Harry Potter. Now, Lex would be on the back of Brainiac's head. Next, Brainiac's head would be in this clear dome, kind of like a fishbowl, like the crystal ball that you see on Disneyland's Haunted Mansion, or it was very much like Mysterio. And then below him was a cloak, or like this big cape. And the reason for this was so that in the final fight, it would be revealed that for Brainiac's body is actually just these spider legs that appear, and he's able to move around that way. So he doesn't have an actual body. It's just like his head is his body and then just emerges legs. Because, well, I mean, John Peters got his wish. He got his spider that he wanted. And that was the way they were going to work it, which I actually kind of enjoyed that idea.
Yeah.
Instead of like him demanding, hey, he should fight a spider, and they think, well, we should just put a giant spider in there. It's just a minion. But like to actually make the actual villain himself the spider makes it a little more terrifying. I do enjoy that concept.
There's definitely a lot of really cool visual ideas in this.
So months went by, millions of dollars had been spent. John Peters was continually unhappy with the direction of Superman and decided to hire another writer for the script.
It's going to work out great.
This writer was Dan Gilroy, who at the time had only written for 2 successful films. It was Chasers and Free Jack. He would later go on to write The Bourne Legacy. He directed Nightcrawler, and he wrote Kong Skull Island, and just wrote a bunch of more stuff after that.
I thought I recognized that name.
This was definitely early in his career.
Yeah, and he's got some good projects under his belt.
He does. He knows what he's doing. In his script, there was much more of an emphasis on Clark Kent being an alien and having the realization of who he is in this world and like how devastating that could be on him. Like this was a concept that was brought up before, but just having that idea that Clark Kent is alone in this. He is the only alien that's on Earth, and the other alien that's coming to Earth is there to kill him. So he's having to deal with that existential crisis. He had concerns about what if he had a baby with Lois Lane, and would a baby kill her during childbirth? Would it like burst out of her kind of like an alien through her chest or her stomach? There was even a scene where Clark Kent was going to propose to Lois, and he was so nervous that he started shaking his leg, and because of that, the whole restaurant started shaking like an earthquake. Another change that was made is that Superman wasn't going to fly. So much like how Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster originally wrote the character, he would actually leap through the air. For him, he thought the idea of him just kind of floating in the air seemed really silly, and he wanted Superman to be more physics-based. And there was even a scene written in the script, and it was storyboarded out, of Superman kind of parkouring through Metropolis, which I think would be amazing to see. Superman parkouring. But after some screen tests of Superman flying, so like when they were trying to do screen tests of the suit, they actually did some effects shots as well of Superman flying, and they decided that that looks a lot better than him kind of jumping around like a... There was a few other ridiculous scenes in there, like there was one where Superman had to fight off a bunch of ninjas.
All right.
Yeah, which, I mean, doesn't seem unusual anymore since, you know, John Peters demanded that Brainiac would fight a polar bear. So,
yeah.
Sure, Superman fights ninjas. Okay, so back to the designers. So because the designers were given so much free range and had so much time to develop the look of the film, with this being an audio medium, it's really hard to show this, but they worked on a few things like what Krypton would look like, the Kryptonians, the Fortress of Solitude, the Daily Planet, LexCorp, and the different aliens that were featured in the menagerie, and the design of Doomsday, who at this point was just kind of like a body of heads, which would be able to like morph into different heads.
Okay.
This is such an interesting alien. Do you remember the face stealer from Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Yeah, of course.
So that was the idea of Doomsday, was that he was kind of put together with a bunch of heads, like heads put together to like make a body. It's so hard to like describe this until you see it. But the idea was that Doomsday could change the faces on his body and then start to resemble people that Clark Kent had known. So he could easily put up a face of like Lois Lane. And if he sees the face of Lois Lane, like he doesn't want to punch her, and he doesn't want to punch a face that looks like her, even though he's trying to fight off Doomsday. So I thought that was an interesting concept to throw in there, that it's not just a physical fight for Superman, it's a psychological fight.
Yeah. Which is what you got to do for the most powerful superhero.
Yeah. So the movie just kept growing. There were more action scenes and details, and with that, the estimated budget just kept ballooning bigger and bigger. The estimations for the project alone were $200 million.
Oof.
This doesn't include the $30 million that were already spent on pre-production alone. And then on top of that, the distribution would be anywhere from like $300 million. I mean, I get it from an executive point of view. You're looking at this huge price tag and you're just like, I don't know if it's worth it anymore. And no one seems to be happy with this project. So why keep going and spend so much money on this?
I don't know. I feel like there's this kind of too big to fail effect that happens when budgets balloon that big, especially with an established IP like Superman. It's like there's this assumption that people are still going to go see it just because it's this big thing. And for the most part, they're right. Big, massive budget movies still tend to make money, even if they don't get as well praised or well reviewed.
Yeah. That's true. They're in panic mode. A lot of scenes were getting cut from the script. A lot of set pieces were scaled down. So like, for example, in the script, if it said like 7 buildings toppled over, instead that would just change and turn into a scene of like pedestrians in a elevator, and they would be in that building as it toppled over, but it would only show the elevator. Things like that. The parts that were really exciting initially, because they started scaling down, they started to lose their appeal, and some of those scenes just started disappearing entirely. And then WB, at that time, they were starting to worry because outside of Superman, they had other films that were just tanking in the box office. The late 90s, early 2000s for Warner Brothers, if you look at their movie lineup, it's just almost all of them are forgettable and no one remembers that they exist. But they were just doing so bad in the box office. So they're looking at this huge price ticket and they have no revenue coming in to be like, we can't make this movie safely without possibly going belly up. Financially, I get it. I understand why they would pull the plug on this.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
So then in April of 1998, the film was put on hold indefinitely. And on their website, supermanlives.com, they put out a statement. I actually did go to supermanlives.com to see if it was still there. It actually just redirects you to Warner Brothers website, so boo.
Ah, bummer. It's not like the Space Jam website.
Oh, I love the Space Jam website. But the statement that was put on supermanlives.com was, Out of commitment to Superman's worldwide legacy and countless fans, and to the potential of creating a Superman story that will push the narrative envelope, Warner Brothers has decided to postpone the start of production on its Superman movie. Warner Brothers feels that at this time the script was not yet do full justice to the potential of the film and of the character, one of the most popular heroes in history. The project, which had been tentatively scheduled to begin principal photography later this summer, remains in active development. Warner Brothers intends to aggressively continue developing the Superman project until it satisfies the highest standards of everyone involved. I mean, it's a very professional way of saying, like, no one's happy with this and it's too expensive.
Was this being shelved, before Batman Forever was a thing?
No. So this was announced in 1998. Batman Forever came out in 95.
Okay.
Batman and Robin just came out the year before in 97.
So the reasoning that they're putting out there, if, we want to make sure this is the best story possible, sounds very noble. And if it's true, it is very noble. But also, it could very easily be studios just trying to save face and whatever possible. And what really could be happening is they're saying that the superhero genre is on a downswing and is becoming a joke and isn't making the money that's going to justify it. That could be more of a reasoning to say, like, we're not going to do this because our Batman movies are starting to flop and this superhero thing isn't going to stick around.
That's true. And they're already experiencing 2 Joel Schumacher superhero movies, the Batman movies, and those budgets ballooned up and didn't pay off as big as they wanted it to. So that's understandable. They're just hoping that they're not making the same mistake again. And they're also taking a risk on a director who's not really known for doing conventional superheroes. And they already made that risk with Joel Schumacher, who's not a conventional superhero director. And he made these really silly and campy Batman movies that had a huge backlash. So I can see why. They've seen this story before. They're not going to repeat themselves again. Everyone was let go from the project at the time. There were some crew members. This is great. They arranged fake funerals with sketches of Superman that would sit inside of a coffin. Tim Burton left to make Sleepy Hollow. He also left with the $5 million from that contract. He later on said, I made the movie, only I didn't film it. And then Nick Cage, he left $20 million richer. And I guess bought the dinosaur egg with it. But, I mean, he was really disappointed to leave. He didn't want to let this go. And he knew that he was going to play a very unique and different Superman. I think he would have been fantastic. And I know we kind of briefly talked about the casting of it, but you think about someone like Nicolas Cage, who's fully committing to this role, who is a big comic book nerd and hero. He understands this character, but is also willing to go down the direction that Tim Burton wants to go down, saying, like, you're not like anyone else. You are an alien on this planet. And how do you act knowing that? And he would have fully committed to what that would have felt like.
That character is such a bullseye that you have to hit. He's almost, he's one of the most precious icons of our country. And the fact that Tim and I were pretty far down the road designing it, and I know with Tim and where I was going to go, we would have done something really special. At least it's out there in the ether that could have happened, but it doesn't have to. We don't have to make the movie. It's still interesting to people. Yeah.
Although he did eventually, and I know you mentioned this before, that he named his son Kal-El. So this was after Superman. But something that did happen and did come true, kind of, was that in the 2018 Teen Titans Go to the Movies, they did have Superman in there. And cast as the voice for Superman was Nick Cage.
Huh, I need to hear that.
Titans, if you keep playing the fool, you'll never be seen as real heroes, only as jokes.
Got him!
Somebody save me.
He finally did it.
Interesting.
He finally got to play Superman. I mean, he didn't get to fully dive into the character, but at least for my satisfaction, he did get to play Superman. Even if it wasn't for a live action movie, I think he was able to fulfill that.
You know, it's so interesting to me that, like, Nicolas Cage arguably is a bigger fan of superheroes than any other big name actor or anybody else who has played or almost played a superhero. Like, he is into superheroes to a bit of a crazy degree. It might not be a good thing to name your son Kal-El, but it is weird that he has been, especially in the last couple of years, been given opportunities to play in superhero worlds, but it's always been kind of on the fringes of things. Like, the biggest thing he did was Ghost Rider, and that was still sort of like, you know, not the biggest Marvel movie and on the fringe and like pre-MCU where it existed in this weird middle ground where it's like, okay, we've got the X-Men movies that are doing well, but, you know, Fantastic Four isn't working and these other things aren't working. And in this weird time before the MCU, we get him being Spider-Man Noir, we get him being Superman and Teen Titans Go. He has never had that chance to really dive into being a superhero. And at this point, he probably is never going to have that chance. I feel like the biggest superhero thing that he'll have other than Ghost Rider at this point, or he has a chance at getting, is something like Jeff Goldblum level Marvel villain. Heck, I could have seen him playing Jeff Goldblum's character in Thor. Like, that could have easily been Nicolas Cage and would have been great. But that's the kind of thing I see happening for Nicolas Cage now at this point.
I think because of the age that Nicolas Cage is at now, I can see if he ever were to revisit a live-action Superman, what would satisfy me is if they were doing more of an old Superman, which I haven't really seen much of that adaptation of, like an older Superman who's kind of wanting to pass on his legacy onto another Superman or Superboy or whatever it may be. So I think it would be something like that, kind of like how we're in the Snyderverse, how they're treating Batman now. This is a much older Batman, kind of like a Batman who's come out of retirement and has to fight again. I feel like you could go along that route if you were to use Nicolas Cage in that Superman role. But I think what would be better, and to make a story that fits more into the lore of Superman that we know, I think if we saw Nick Cage as Lex Luthor, I think he would be fantastic at that.
Ooh. Yeah, I never saw Batman v Superman, but I saw lots of clips of Jesse Eisenberg's very strange take on Lex Luthor, and I feel like if you gave that exact same direction to Nicolas Cage, he would have been able to pull it off.
He would have. And he would have, I felt like, been more believable in that instance, where Jesse Eisenberg, he does pull it off, but I think because of the pigeonhole that we put him in through the movies he's done before, it's so hard to separate that image and put it into this, not even just Lex Luthor, but this very extravagant, eccentric Lex Luthor, which I am enjoying that type of character. It's just so hard to picture Jesse Eisenberg doing that.
Jesse Eisenberg's not the right person for it.
I think you'll have to see it, but in my head, like, he pulls it off, but the image doesn't really work for me. He doesn't physically seem intimidating.
Yeah.
Where Nicolas Cage, I feel like you could get that physical intimidation out of. Gene Hackman has this physicalness about him, this big, like, broad shoulderness, where you feel him commanding the room. And I thought that was a brilliant casting when they brought him on to do Lex Luthor, that he has that command in the room that I found very appealing and very fitting for the character. And I feel like for Cage, he could pull that off if he was given the role of Lex.
Yeah. When you were building up to that, I thought you were going to say that you could see him playing Jor-El, you know, Superman's father, Kryptonian father. But I like the Lex idea better. I think that's a much better idea.
I think if you're going to use Nicolas Cage, you use him for the full film, where when they brought in Marlon Brando to play Kal-El's father, he was only there most predominantly in the beginning and just kind of like Skyped in every once in a while throughout the movie. We do have to mention John Peters and what he went on to, because he put on this little film called Wild Wild West, which, if you don't know already, spoiler alert, in the third act we see Kenneth Branagh fighting with Will Smith, Calvin Klein, while he's in this giant, goddamn mechanical steampunk spider thing.
He has an 80-foot tarantula. Yes, well, I was coming to that. Nice to see an invention that actually works.
Peter's got his wish.
Yep.
Whatever.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
On a side note, though, in September of 1998, there was an aspiring screenwriter and comic book fan, Alex Ford, who actually submitted a script named Superman, Man of Steel, which was actually a 7-part movie series.
Oh my gosh.
It actually impressed a lot of the producers at WB, and they said, this is great. And they actually passed it on to John Peters, and Peters looked at it and he was like, no, I don't want to do that. Which I think, knowing how Peters operates, I think that he didn't even read it at all. That's what I want to believe, that he saw, oh, since your Superman movie is failing, here's one that could succeed. And he's like, what? You're calling me a failure because I can't get this movie done? I'm going to keep going with this. I don't care about these other ideas. So, and knowing that he doesn't read scripts, but has people read it to him.
Yeah.
I want to believe that he just dismissed it without even thinking about it. Now, just because Cage, Burton, and Peters had left, that doesn't mean that WB was ready to shut down the project just yet. Producer Lorenzo di Bonaventura, which we mentioned before in our Batman episode, he was seeking to get Superman back on the silver screen. Other directors that were considered to make Gilroy's script were Michael Bay and Martin Campbell. They didn't go through with those, but in July of 1999, writer William Wisher, who had written Terminator, Terminator 2, Judge Dredd, The 13th Warrior, he attempted his take on the story. The directors that were considered for that was Shahar Kapoor, who had recently directed Elizabeth. Another director was Simon West, who had done Con Air. And I did not know this, but he directed the Rick Astley Never Gonna Give You Up music video.
Oh, interesting.
The guy who directed that music video, Never Gonna Give You Up, also directed Con Air. There was Ralph Zondag, who directed We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, which was a sequel to A Dinosaur Story, and later on directed Dinosaur, that live-action Disney movie from the early 2000s. That one, not many people remember, but I had a DVD of that, and I remember seeing that. It was just so lifelike to me, although if I revisit it, it might not be. I'm kind of scared to rewatch it now. I don't want to destroy my childhood or my nostalgia. Another one was Stephen Norrington, who had directed Death Machine and Blade. I mean, we know that none of them eventually directed it, but Wisher's story didn't seem to pan out, seeing that they got a different writer to now make a script, and this was Paul Attanasio, who had written Quiz Show and Donnie Brasco. He was actually hired in 2001, and he was there to write another draft for The Man of Steel. Now, that doesn't mean that Superman was out of the limelight completely. With the image of Christopher Reeve's Superman becoming dimmer and dimmer, the show Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, that was actually canceled in 1997, but at that time, Smallville came out. And actually started to recapture a lot of these Superman fans and kind of like reignited that Superman fandom. So they knew that this would sell. In 2002, it was reported that Charlie's Angels director Mick G, he was set to direct Ed Ignasio's Superman script, while at the same time, J.J. Abrams had pitched a Superman trilogy, which we had mentioned before in the Batman episode. Now, this was actually a separate pitch, because if you remember, he was going in to try and help reboot the Batman franchise, and with the idea of like Batman versus Superman, that's where he came in. He's like, we have to start at Superman first, and here's what I'm going to propose. In his film, Superman faces off with Kryptonian Ty-Zor. Early in the script, in about 6 pages in, Ty-Zor defeats Superman, which is when we flash back to Krypton, who is under attack by Rousers, which are these like giant 3-legged mech warrior machines controlled by Kata-Zor, who is the brother of Jor-El. Kata-Zor is in search of Jor-El's son, Kal-El, not knowing that he has actually been shot off into space moments before the attack. We watch Clark Kent grow up in Smallville, move to Metropolis, become a journalist for the Daily Planet, and fall in love with Lois Lane, blah. That we know is going to happen. While Lois is investigating the CIA division that observes UFOs, there is the secret CIA special agent, Dr. Lex Luthor. He admits that they have discovered a crashed spacecraft similar to the one that Kal-El had crashed in when he was a child. In a save the cat moment, Superman saves Air Force One from crash landing that had both Lois Lane and the president inside of it. So it seems to me like every Superman movie that goes out there, Superman always has to save people in a plane. Even the pilot episode of Supergirl, one of the first things she does, saves people on a plane.
It's such a dramatic thing, and it's, you know, one of those tasks that really only Superman can do.
One thing that I did enjoy about The Boys in season 1, when Homelander was on the plane.
That is an iconic scene of that show. That sequence is like the reason to watch the show.
I love that they took that trope that we always see in Superman movies and flipped it on his head, and explaining it to the Wonder Woman character. Explains it to her, saying like,
yeah, you gotta go out there, lift the plane up.
Lift the plane? How? There's nothing to stand on. It's fucking air.
I don't know, fly at it, ram it straight.
I don't know, that kind of speed, either the plane goes ass over tit or I'll punch straight through the hull.
For them to turn it
like
that and be like, this is unreasonable to expect this. It's so great.
I remember being wowed by that sequence when it first came out, and talking about the show to people was like, this is the dark superhero movie because you get a sequence where Superman is like, oh, we've got to let this entire plane full of people die because there's no way I can save all of them. And if I save only some of them, it's going to look bad for me. So instead, we're just going to let everybody...
Yeah, because they'll spread the word.
Yep. So instead, we're going to let everybody die, and I'll just say that I was too late.
Yeah.
I think that show is not a perfect show, but it does do a lot of really cool things with the superhero genre.
Yes. Even Seth Rogen, he was asked, while you're making the show, do you look at superhero movies differently, or do you not like them anymore? And he's like, no, I still love superhero movies. I just like this idea of putting superheroes in the real world with real problems, and what does it look like for them to have more of a celebrity culture identity. So you don't look at it as like they're a superhero. You look at it as like they're a celebrity, and how does that affect them on top of being a superhero?
Everything that's happened this year has certainly affected the lens through which I view all media. And like, there's so many things that I look at differently now because of events that have happened over the last 6 months. And one of those things is the way we view police now, and kind of the realizations of the problems with police. Superhero movies are cop stories.
Yeah.
And like, superheroes are cops, and that is a problem and something to address and think about.
Yeah. I think the closest we've got to like a more popular medium of like superhero movies is when we had Civil War come out, of this idea of like, we need to take responsibility for our actions.
Yeah. But even then, I feel like that movie plays it very, very safe because, you know, I love my Marvel movies, especially Captain America movies. That movie in particular, I have problems with because it brings up these big questions of like, what responsibility do superheroes have? But I got frustrated because the third act, the conflict stops being about the role of superheroes and starts becoming just a conflict between these two personalities. It kind of abandons that question and never really wrestles with that question in the way I would personally love to see it wrestled with. But But it's tough because it's like there is not going to be an easy answer that is going to make sense in your big budget blockbuster film that you want everybody to watch and enjoy and not be too offended by.
Yeah. I mean, most people were not going to see that movie because the conflict was interesting. They're going to see the movie because they teased Spider-Man in the trailer.
Yeah.
Okay, so saves Lois Lane, the president, Air Force One. He rescues the plane. Blah. Because of that, Superman's popularity, it blows up. It grows. And while that happens, his Earth father, Jonathan Clark, he dies of a coronary, which has been done in the comics before. It was done in the original movie. That's kind of like his Uncle Ben moment. He's dead, and like, how is he going to honor his life and go on to like be bigger than he was?
And there's one thing I do know, son, and that is you are here for a reason. I don't know whose reason, whatever the reason is, you know.
It's not as memorable as with great power comes great responsibility. So not as memorable as that, but that is kind of like his push, his motive. He does go back home. He comforts his mother, Martha, while she's grieving, but she also convinces him that he needs to go out and still be a superhero. It's not worth it for him to just go back home after this death and stay there with Martha. Like, he needs to go out there and be his own person, be his own superhero. While he was doing an interview with Lois as Superman, they were at the Washington's National Mall. That's where we see one of Tyzor's Rousers attack, which causes Superman to like bounce back into action. This was just supposed to be like a big action sequence that just like takes place in a mall. Lex Luthor, who wasn't a fan of Superman, he actually uses this opportunity to point out that Superman is an alien, and he is also welcoming unwanted aliens to Earth and battling with them, which is ultimately causing this destruction. So he's getting a lot of people on his side saying, like, if he wasn't here in the first place, our mall wouldn't be destroyed and these people wouldn't be dead because of it. So soon after, Tyzor is revealed with 3 other Kryptonians. There was Baz-El, Khan, and Alta, who are all there to fight Superman. With some of the kryptonite that was stolen from the Smithsonian Institute asteroid collection, Tyzor manages to use that to kill Superman. The Kryptonians team up with Lex Luthor, who has somehow become the president of the United States.
Whenever I hear the word somehow, I just think of Rise of Skywalker. Somehow, Palpatine is returned. Somehow, Lex Luthor is the president.
But sure.
Although that's a comic thing, right? Doesn't Lex Luthor become president in a comic run somewhere?
I believe so. I think he does. While Superman is dead, he's not actually dead, but he enters this endless abyss white space, which J.J. Abrams termed the infinity timeless, where he learns of a prophecy. Oh. In this prophecy, there was a prince that was sent away, raised on another world. He's faced with a challenge, and when that challenge is defeated, he must return home to fulfill his destiny.
Ugh, there's nothing dumber than prophecies and chosen one narratives. And it's like, isn't it enough that Superman is the last surviving alien of this planet? Isn't that interesting enough? Do we have to... I'm sorry, I'm just getting frustrated about Ray Palpatine all over again.
I guess this just explains how Superman comes to life.
Yeah.
And he actually bursts out of his coffin. He then defeats Lex, Ty, and his goons. He then returns back to Krypton, and this is presumably where the second movie would begin.
Hey, it's Ryan Seacrest. Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino. With no download required, you can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino and play over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
For the most part, the script was well received. One of the major issues that was brought up was when Clark Kent goes home to comfort Martha. She gives Clark this metal artifacts, and when it was put together in the negative space of it, it actually carves out this S symbol, which he then puts on his chest. It was implied that it was given to Martha and Jonathan by Jor-El before Kal-El ever landed on planet Earth, which is strange that he would go there ahead of time, and because he sends Kal-El out in the state of emergency and doesn't know where he's going to end up. But the fact that he had this planned to be like, hey, I need you to take care of this. And I think this is just more so to fit into the prophecy that was mentioned before, but that is a ridiculous plot point. An even more crazy part was when Superman and supercharged 50-year-old Kung Fu master Lex Luthor fight in the third act of the movie. Overall, the script seemed to have Superman elements, but didn't fully understand the character and the themes of the comics. Although the producer that really loved it, that was John Peters. He really loved this script. He thought this script was great. And with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man just released around this time, with the lighthearted tone of the script, he seemed that it was appropriate compared to Burton's odd and dark take on the character.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we mentioned before, like, the conflict in the Batman episode between Batman versus Superman and Lorenzo and him having to quit after this and all that stuff. Both scripts, Batman versus Superman, J.J. Abrams' Superman script, they were given to 10 executives at Warner Brothers to decide which would be the best direction to go, and overwhelmingly they sided with Peters, saying that they should make the J.J. Abrams trilogy, which went over Lorenzo's decision, which eventually he got out of that situation. McG, again, was the first choice to direct J.J. Abrams' script. When the studio decided that they were going to film this, they wanted to film this in Australia to cut a lot of the costs. And McG, he then left the project when they said that they were going to film in Australia, partly because he is fearful of flying. I was not aware of this, but yeah, he has a McG who directed Charlie's Angels is afraid of flying.
Also sounds like a great fear to have when you are making a movie about a guy who flies.
Yeah, crazy. So instead of doing this, he actually went on to make the sequel to Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle. Oh, that it's great. For me, Charlie's Angels is a guilty pleasure. They're fun. Next in line to direct was Brett Ratner, who had directed a bunch of music videos. He had directed Rush Hour 1 and 2 and The Family Man with Nick Cage. And he was brought on to take on the J.J. Abrams script. To get the studio immediately excited, he wanted to cast Anthony Hopkins. He recently directed in Red Dragon as Jor-El, Superman's father.
That would have been cool. It would have been just like his role in Thor.
Yeah.
My sons, I've been waiting for you.
I know, we've come to take you home.
Home, yes.
That's what he is in Thor.
He is. No, he'd be such a great Jor-El. And then after wrestling with the budget, Ratner decided to leave the production in March 19th of 2003. Next in line, though, was Bryan Singer. And he was just coming off of doing X-Men and The Usual Suspects. This is such a strange story, but while he was at a Bob Dylan concert, Singer had a conversation with his friend Kevin Spacey, which, they know each other from The Usual Suspects. And Bryan Singer actually asked him about Superman because he knew that he was cast as Lex Luthor, but he was asking if Tim Burton was still attached to the project. And Singer had actually been following this production for years, and while he was off making X-Men, he was incredibly jealous that his former star, Kevin Spacey, was going on to be in the next Superman movie as Lex Luthor. Singer had asked what happened, and he basically told the whole story that I just did. Now that he knew that there was no director attached to this project, he immediately went to Warner Brothers and he pitched his Superman movie. At this time, Richard Donner's wife, Lauren Schuler Donner, she was actually the producer for all of the X-Men movies that Singer was making. While premiering X-Men 2 in April of 2003, Singer would propose pitches to both Richard and Lauren about his Superman movie. And he didn't so much want to remake it, but instead he wanted to make a vague sequel to the Superman 1 and Superman 2 being canon, and then just kind of ignoring Superman 3 and 4 and Supergirl. Kind of like with Jurassic World, how they just kind of said, you know, it's canon, just the first Jurassic Park, and we'll ignore the next two and kind of continue on from there. The idea was that Superman would be gone for a long time, and the world would have forgotten about him, and years later he would come back to save the world. Singer began working with Michael Daughtry and Dan Harris, who had previously worked with Bryan on X-Men 2, and they began working on the script. WB had greenlit Superman Returns. In an odd turn of events, Brett Ratner, he left the Superman project to actually go on to direct X-Men: The Last Stand, while Singer stepped out to direct. On top of that, they managed to make the film at a budget the studio was more comfortable with. They actually proposed that it would be $223 million to produce it, and Singer managed to bring that down to $204 million. So WB was really happy about that. Plus, as we know, Kevin Spacey got to be Lex Luthor, so yay.
Gods are selfish beings who fly around in little red capes and don't share their power with mankind.
He was attached to this project from the beginning, and I didn't know this before. I didn't know that this was connected in any way from Tim Burton's Superman to Bryan Singer's Superman.
Yeah.
I had no idea the through line of it, and I thought that Kevin Spacey was considered, and then he just had to get recasted again. But no, instead he was asked, do you want to play Lex Luthor? He said yes, and years later, he became Lex Luthor.
Is there anybody else from Superman Lives who was a part of Superman Returns? I mean, is John Peters still around putting his thumb in things?
Yeah, John Peters was the producer of Superman Returns, yes.
Oh, okay.
Superman Returns, it hits theaters on June 28th of 2006. The opening weekend was underwhelming, to say the least. It made about $52 million opening weekend and made over $200 million in the US during its theatrical run. This was actually being compared to X-Men: The Last Stand, which actually made over $100 million in its opening weekend. But for Bryan Singer, I believe that him just making a Superman movie was the dream that he wanted to fill overall.
Yeah. I haven't seen Superman Returns.
It's interesting. If you watch the Donner Superman movies, it's a lot more of the same, just with updated technology.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
Even in that one, they have Superman saving people in a plane.
What the hell is that?
There's some kind of unidentified bogey coming in from the north.
Roger that.
And it's coming in fast.
In the end, WB was just happy to get a Superman film out there. It wasn't a flop, but it wasn't a major success either. But for now, the nightmare of a Superman development hell was over. I'm going to end my notes with this quote, which I thought was very fitting. This is from one of the writers of Superman Returns, Michael Dougherty. He says, "I think Kevin Smith's was the only one that wasn't about the origin. But they were all, from what I know, vastly different from what Donner had done. I don't want to say they were betrayals of Donner, but I think what's really interesting about Superman Legend and the character is that each incarnation, in its own way, pays tribute to the one that came before it. And it does so with any amount of respect for the source material. And I felt that the previous attempts were so different that they almost forgot about their ties to the legacy and the history of the character."
I kind of have like two final thought conclusions that have been swirling around in my head about kind of what my takeaway is from this whole story. Because if Superman Lives with Nicolas Cage, if Warner Brothers had decided not to shelve it and continued with production, it was made, do you think it would have been good? Do you think it would have been successful? Do you think it would have been interesting?
I think it would have been interesting. I don't think that financially it would have been something that Warner Brothers would have been happy with. I feel like it just would have been part of the Burton era.
Yeah.
Something that I didn't bring up in my notes that I should have mentioned in there, because there were loose talks about this, but had this movie been made, it would have opened up the idea of the Justice League.
Yeah.
And creating the Justice League with Nick Cage and Michael Keaton as part of the League, which means we would have gotten a Flash movie. We would have gotten a Wonder Woman movie much earlier. We would have gotten this Justice League movie earlier. So I think had this movie gotten made, I don't really think of it much as what this individual movie, what would have happened, but I think it could have launched something much bigger and more consistent within the DC cinematic universe than what we are seeing now.
When I hear this story, I feel like if the movie was made and did come out, it sounds to me like it would have ended up being a complete mess. Because you have writers keep changing while you have production designers creating ideas and creating looks and creating set pieces while the script itself is still being rethought and the fundamental idea of what the story is focusing on keeps being rethought. And it reminds me so much of what happened on The Hobbit, where, you had all this pre-production done while they were still trying to figure out script stuff. And so you were trying to marry set pieces and visual ideas to story, and it just became a mess. Or what I feel like happened on Rise of Skywalker. We don't have nearly as much great information on the behind the scenes of Rise of Skywalker because Disney is really tight-lipped about that. But based off of the super short time frame that they had to make that movie and just kind of the way the movie feels to me, it feels like all of these set pieces were created in conjunction with J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio trying to figure out what the script was. And so to me, that movie feels like it's just going from set piece to set piece, but the through line isn't there.
Yeah. Do you know offhand who the directors that were considered and quit?
For Rise of Skywalker?
For Rise of Skywalker, yeah.
So it was originally Colin Trevorrow. When they first announced the creative team for Rise of Skywalker, it was Colin Trevorrow directing and Rian Johnson writing. Which, Rian Johnson was going to write and direct 8 and then just write 9 to finish off 9. I believe in the process with Colin Trevorrow, Rian Johnson wasn't the writer anymore, and then he got fired 2 years before Disney wanted to release Rise of Skywalker. I believe it was after Last Jedi came out that Colin Trevorrow got fired, and then J.J. Abrams was brought on with Chris Terrio directing, and we got Rise of Skywalker, and it really, really feels to me like just based off of the really short time frame and based off of how much pre-pro work was done before J.J. Abrams was brought on and the mess that movie feels like to me, it really seems like it was a similar situation of all this pre-pro is being worked on while the script is trying to be figured out at the same time. And so the final film is just kind of a mess. Or probably the favorite one sentence review I heard from somebody was, it's a series of great scenes that could have been viewed in any order. And that's how Rise of Skywalker felt. And it feels to me like the same thing would have happened with Superman Lives, is that there would have been a lot of cool visuals and some cool scenes, but the through line wouldn't have been there, and it just kind of would have been a mess.
Now, do you think had John Peters had been more hands-off, do you think there might have been maybe more consistency in the story, the through line, and had he not been so controlling and so in making this toxic environment for these designers, I don't know, I believe that they could have made something consistent, more through line, and a better story instead of, or even Kevin Smith, they were being bombarded this whole time.
It sounds to me like John Peters is just obsessed with set pieces and just obsessed with, what's going to sell the best toys, and just obsessed with this. You told the story of him staring up at the ceiling and imagining the movie while Kevin Smith read it. And yes, the visual aspect is so important, but it seems like he's so obsessed with getting these certain visuals, whether it's a giant mechanical spider or whatever else, into this movie, that it's completely abandoning the need for one story that is the driving aspect of the film. And this is something that they talk about with the Marvel movies and Kevin Feige, and I think one of the reasons why those movies and that series is so successful is they don't go into a movie being like, okay, this movie, we want to have Spider-Man show up, and we want to have this sequence in there, and we want to have this happen. They say, this is the main story we want to tell, and then we figure out what works best with that story in there. You know, I don't think they went into Endgame with the idea of, oh, let's do callbacks to these previous scenes and let's make sure we have a sequence of Cap wielding a hammer and let's do all of this. It feels to me more like they were like, okay, here's the big issue we need to solve, and in dealing with that main story, let's figure out these other things that we can tie into it. I feel like if you were going into that movie with the, okay, this is going to be our time travel movie where we're going to do all these other big set pieces, I feel like there would have been different set pieces chosen. They wouldn't have gone back to Thor the Dark World because nobody would want to return to that movie. But that was the sequence that made the most sense with the story they were already trying to tell. And that's what ended up being the best version of the story, in my opinion. I think it's a sign to me that story needs to always come first.
Yeah. And in the end, that's what we're going to remember. And even with something like Tim Burton taking on Batman, the thing that I take away the most from Batman and watching those is the story that comes out of it, the characters that come out of it. Like, I'm not necessarily looking for the merchandise. I don't remember much of Joel Schumacher's movies. Every once in a while, I actually have to look up, wait, was Val Kilmer in Batman and Robin or Batman Forever? I can't, because they were so muddled into that kind of era and messiness, and it was tossed aside because of what was put into it, and now we just remember it as like, that's the campy movie. And had Superman Lives been done properly, with the idea of Nicolas Cage taking on this character to be so unique and alien-like, which we never really saw much of. We kind of saw it in Donner's Superman, where Superman is very meek when he is Clark Kent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Gosh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to shake it up like that.
Oh, well, of course not, Lois. I mean, why would anyone want to make a total stranger look like a fool?
But you don't believe him as he's an alien on Earth. And I think the concept of Superman being an alien on Earth is still something that could be wrestled with, at least in the cinematic universe. I believe that they started touching on it when they were doing Smallville.
I didn't dive in after Lex's car. It hit me at 60 miles an hour. Does that sound normal to you? I'd give anything to be normal.
I really like that idea, and for a Superman movie to actually take on that conflict, I think that is what needs to happen in at least the cinematic universe of Superman.
I don't think you can do a good Superman story anymore. Like, I don't think you can do a good Superman story, but not for the reasons that a lot of people say. There's a lot of people who say you can't make a good Superman movie because Superman is too powerful. And I don't think that's the issue. I think you can make a super, super powerful character like that and still give them conflicts that are interesting, where the stakes feel real. I think the reason why you're never going to be able to do a great Superman movie anymore is because Superman is such an archetype of the genre that what Superman means is more interesting to think about it as Superman connects to our real world culture more than the story itself. Like, I think about, and this is just something I was thinking about in our part 1 discussion with talking about the origins of Superman as a character and how he's become like the archetype for the superhero. And I think that fact gets in the way of us being able to create the ideal Superman movie, especially since we already have the true to the story movie with Richard Donner's Superman with Christopher Reeve. I think it's the same reason why I don't believe we're ever going to be able to get another great story set in Middle Earth, set in the Lord of the Rings world, because we already have the film that is as true to the story as it possibly can be. Because anything else has to be a take. Any other Superman movie, aside from the Richard Donner, which even though it wasn't the first attempt to put Superman on screen, it is the definitive attempt because that's when they had the technology to be true to the story. But any other version of it is going to be a take on Superman, and you can't do a take on the thing that started the genre. It just feels like you can do a take on Batman because Batman is a specific character and there are so many different angles you can view that story on. And if you want to do a take on Superman, you do it like The Boys, where you are doing a take on the genre instead of a take on that character. I just think that Superman is too much an archetype that you can't make a movie about it anymore, because it can't be a take, but you can't do a definitive version because we already have that. We already have the true to the story version of the character.
And the only reason to ever make a Superman standalone movie is if you are going to go and open up the universe into the Justice League.
And even then, Man of Steel and Wonder Woman are the only two DCU movies that I've seen. And Man of Steel, I was really just disappointed by because it felt like too much of a take even there.
What if they just came out with a Justice League movie, whole brand new cast, not part of the Snyderverse, but you just had the characters come into this story. When Marvel decided to launch Spider-Man, they decided to go against his origin story because we had seen it.
Because we've already seen it a billion times.
If we approach something like Superman, where we know his origin, we know what happened to him, we don't need to see this again. What if you could create, instead of making a standalone Superman movie, you could create a Justice League movie from scratch, knowing these characters' origins, and then from there, you could branch off and make individual stories, not necessarily a origin story, but now a standalone movie where Superman is needed. And I feel like that could work much better than trying to reboot the Superman we already know.
I think that is like the way to do it, is make him a character in a Justice League movie, make him a character in somebody else's story. But I don't know if we can get his story in a way that works. Like, I think it's Superman as a character in somebody else's journey.
Hey, it's Ryan Seacrest. Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino. With no download required, you can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino and play over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
So one thing that I want to do before we sign off, and this is going to be the end of season 1. We're going to take a little break because for me, doing research for the show takes a lot to do. And I mean, you guys listen to the show, you understand. And we are also wrapping up the Weird Alphabet, and we're trying to figure out what that is going to mean for us. So I kind of want to focus more on that in between there. But in the meantime, like, you guys can still send us emails of what you would like to see in like season 2.
We will be back.
We will be. Yeah. But the thing that I wanted to bring up was that part of the reason why I did this podcast and took on the subject of movies that didn't get made. Again, we had so many discussions before about films that didn't get made, but the thing that really sent me in that trajectory has to be Jon Schnepp. But he was the director of The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened? And I got to see a premiere of that documentary while we were at what was called Kamikaze, which is now known as LA Comic-Con. We actually got an interview with Jon Schnepp, and if you're unaware, he unfortunately passed away in 2018, which was just heartbreaking to know that. And for the last thing that I want to include is the interview that we had conducted with Jon Schnepp.
This is with you and Michael, correct?
Yeah.
Because I don't think I was there that day for this.
Mm-mm.
And we are rolling here. It's Jon Schnepp, right? And Holly Payne? Like Holly Payne, okay. All right, today we are here with Jon Schnepp and Holly Payne, aka the producers of The Death of Superman Lives, the documentary about how an amazing movie never happened. So how are you two doing today?
Doing well. It's the last day of Stan Lee's LA Comic-Con, and we're tired, ready to go home, but we've had a good time.
Bought a lot of cool stuff. I'm definitely in the tired zone myself. We're in the last hour, the last home stretch.
We've been celebrating having our movie available now for a little over a year and a half. We're really proud of it. We've actually moved on and sold a series to Comic-Con HQ, a brand new SVOD that our series will be on towards the middle of next year. So, we're excited about that, kind of expanding that whole role of shows about what happened to different movies that didn't get made.
What kind of spurred the idea to get The Death of Superman Lives documented?
I'll let John answer that first, because he was fascinated by the subject matter for quite some time. So it was really his brainchild. He was, fixated on the concept of the Superman movie that never saw the light of day and had been collecting art. But I'll let him finish that part of the story.
Obviously we'd all heard and read about the Tim Burton Superman movie. Nick Cage was going to be Superman. Then, years passed. You're like, what happened to that? And then some of the concept art came online, and that's what kind of got me interested in it. It was it reminded me of a heavy metal science fiction movie. And the idea of Tim Burton, after him doing the Mars Attacks film right before he went into Sleepy Hollow and then a bunch of other films, it felt like, wow, I felt like that could have been something really fun. And after Superman Returns came out, I felt like, wow, I really wanted to see something that wasn't Richard Donner-esque. So it made my interest in some of the previous versions like J.J. Abrams and Tim Burton's. I just started to investigate that a little more. And my interest got piqued by more artwork that slowly came online. I saw the Steve Johnson kind of light up suits. And so I just kind of was talking about it. So people were like, you should make a documentary about it. And I was like, I don't really do that kind of stuff. But the idea of it was let's do a Kickstarter. So that's what we did.
Yeah, speaking of the Kickstarter, how did that go? I mean, I heard that you had to do 2 different crowdfunding campaigns.
Right. We started with Kickstarter, and then actually midway through making the film, we ran out of money. So we had to do another second crowdfunding campaign. We did the second crowdfunding campaign with a company called Fanbacks. Both of those crowdfunding campaigns gave us the majority of the funds to make the film, and then we had a private investor later towards the end just for finishing funds. But really, this is definitely a fan-made film, and that's what's so satisfying about it, is that everybody sort of has a piece of it because they helped make it happen. And what was great was to see the response of people who had known about the project and were curious, as John was, about why it didn't get made. And then there were also new people who had never heard of it before and were curious. So it kind of covered all bases. But actually, when we flew out to London to interview Tim Burton, we were flat broke. That was in between, somewhere in the middle. And we were kind of flying on a prayer, hoping we would get an interview with Tim Burton. And we did. And then that, of course, that's when some of the other doors started to unlock for us.
Having never done a documentary in full, I'd cut a documentary a few years before that. But really, primarily, I'd been directing cartoon shows for about, at that point in time, 12 years. So that was where, the bread and butter was. And that was my prime focus, doing some short films on the side. But doing a documentary is a different beast. And it requires not hiring people, but getting people's permission to interview them, which is kind of taxing on a different level and a different front in a way that none of us were really prepared for. So a lot of time and effort and energy went into that first year and a half, where it took a lot longer to actually make than I ever thought it would.
I would say, honestly, that was probably the most time-consuming thing, was actually getting the interviews locked in. And then really what happened was, in the editing room, we started to piece the story together. And it was amazing how well everything sort of dovetailed, because we're realizing the story as it was happening. We didn't know what the story was. But by the end of it, once we got John Peters, we were able to sort of tie everything together, and it came off to be more than we ever hoped for, I think.
I mean, Tim Burton was definitely I like to refer to him in a fun way as the Pokemon ball, because when we got him, he unlocked literally all the other artists and the people who were kind of tentative or hesitant to talk to us because they were unsure. Look, have you talked to Tim about this? And up until the point before we got him, we were like, well, not yet. And they usually were like, well, let's wait and see. Once Tim kind of gave the blessing of, hey, look, here's the opening the doors to the floodgate of the concept art, the footage with Nick Cage and himself. All these things really helped add to that presence and also the seriousness of our take on the subject matter. I think a lot of people were unsure of where we were coming from. And then, hey, look, Tim feels very positive and confident with it. That makes me feel good about talking about it. So, and ultimately, I think one of the best experiences that both Holly and I had was opening night, having so many of the people involved in the different aspects of the movie, from concept design to some of the suit design to the writers, for all of them to be there at the actual opening and be able to see and meet each other and talk to each other, that was one of the greatest things for us.
It was very much a catharsis, I think, for everybody involved in that project, because there was a lot of shame attached to Superman Lives. There were so many people who had worked on it that had been sort of hiding their work because it was perceived as a big disaster. And when we got all the concept art and all the things the materials we got from Tim Burton and from everyone else, we saw a totally different picture. We saw something that was really, really intriguing, and the artwork was gorgeous, and there was so little shame attached to it that it was great to be able to connect all these people, and also for them to see what went on after they stopped their part of the project. So at our opening night, at our premiere, it was so great to hear from all of those people and hear them say, wow, I knew my part, but I didn't know all of this stuff existed. And this could have been a really cool film, you know?
Yeah, it's like when you hear about the UFOs and they've taken the parts apart and given it to different scientists. Like, I worked on the anti-gravity. Oh, I worked on the Teflon. It's like, it's that, but in reality. So it was like, it was a lot of fun to see that kind of come together. And also, I got to say, with, Holly and I saw that Tim Burton, Nick Cage footage like a full year and a half before anyone else on the planet Earth ever saw it. So we knew how
45 minutes of that, there's only 7 minutes in the film, but our jaws were on the floor the entire time.
We knew how special it was. And so for us, coming from people are like, yeah, that movie would have sucked. We heard that so many times before our movie came out, and we knew that the movie would have been something special. So it was really such an uphill battle until the movie came out. And then when the movie came out, now we can tell when someone's seen the movie, because the people who've actually seen our documentary come up to us and say, wow, I wish they made that Superman Lives movie. I would have liked to have seen that. I knew, and Holly knows that they've seen our doc. The people who haven't seen the doc are like, man, that movie would have sucked. I'm like, you haven't seen the doc.
It's amazing. One of the other anecdotes I wanted to share was when we had our premiere, we had a 3-night premiere. The third night, Kevin Smith came and he did a Q&A with us after the screening. But while he was watching the movie, John and I were sitting behind him, watching him watch John Peters for the first time in many, many years. And just to be able to sort of witness his shoulders going up and down and him laughing, and at the same time just going, he's still the same guy. It was really kind of satisfying to experience Kevin's experience of the film, and he's been such a huge supporter of it. And his role stopped once he was done with the script. Once Tim hired another writer, Kevin was off, and that's the way it was for everybody who worked on the film. So to see them find the whole thing come together was really, really, really cool.
For Kevin to know that his script was what most of the artwork was based on, even though they had other writers, those artists didn't have that script. So they were basing a lot of the draft, the skeleton, the spine of Superman Lives always was the same storyline. So from Kevin's script all the way through Dan Gilroy's script with Wesley Strick in the middle, the storyline was always the same story, but the dialogue and certain scenes changed fluidly throughout. And, ultimately the final script, I think, was a shooting script to go. So that's kind of the semi-sad, sweet part of it is like, man, it would have been cool to see, because that kind of creativity we haven't seen yet in a Superman film. I would volley some of the aspects of Man of Steel and even Batman v Superman. We've seen little moments of all of these different previous versions from, Superman Lives, all the progress as are slowly made, little bits and pieces made into that actual feature film.
I wanted to dedicate not just this episode, but this season to John, because I really feel like without that documentary, the interest in unproduced, unmade movies and the stories and the amount of in-depth research going in behind it, I don't think I would be making this unless it wasn't for his movie. I have a lot to thank for him and what he's done. So I figured Superman Lives, it would be a great closer for this season.
Absolutely.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Thank you, everybody, for listening, and thank you, everybody, for the support. And I am really, really excited to see where this show continues in the future. This has been an experience for me that it's been a really awesome experience to be able to practice different skills in podcasting and researching and be able to learn a lot about, not just about the process of movie making, but the process of making a show like this. And I have been really happy about the amount of kind words I've gotten from friends who started listening as well, and people who are very interested in this subject and find our way of approaching it super interesting as well. So thank you, everybody, so much. And thank you, Dan, for all of the hard work. If people don't know, Dan is the one who does all of the work on this show. He's doing the editing. He's doing the research for most of the stories. This show exists because of Dan's hard work.
I'm very appreciative of, yes, you, David, and for being here along this journey, and to all the listeners, the followers, anyone who wishes to see this show succeed. And I feel like we have a lot more and a much brighter future ahead of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you want to send us any emails about any movies that you want us to cover, or have any corrections, because we will make mistakes. I know we do. You can send that to notgetmade@gmail.com. We are on Instagram at howdidthisnotgetmade, and we are on Twitter at
HDTNGM.
Yes, what David said. You can check us out there. But yeah, that'll be it for season 1.
I would really love if we get a good amount of emails to do like a hiatus emails episode.
Ooh, I can do that. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. For our feed, we might post some things here and there. We might be doing some interviews with other podcasts as well, and just kind of talking to them in the meantime. But yeah, stay subscribed, and you'll get our first episode of season 2 when we figure that out.
Thanks again, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Ryan Seacrest. Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino. With no download required, you can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino and play over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.